Imagine waking up one day and realizing your entire personality, your anxieties, your cravings, even your ambitions, may not be you at all. What if the voice in your head, the one whispering that you're not enough, that you need to work harder, achieve more, stay strong, stay silent, isn't your voice, but an echo? An echo of something unspoken, unhealed, and buried. You wake up, coffee, emails, work, noise, expectations. The pace is brutal, but you manage. You always manage. You're functioning. You're even praised for it. But there's an ache you can't name, a sense that your life, your entire sense of self, is built on a cracked foundation. You're not addicted to alcohol or pills or heroin, not obviously at least. But you might be addicted to perfection, or productivity, or validation. You might be addicted to staying distracted, to avoiding silence, to never feeling. You've worn these patterns like armor. They've helped you survive. But you've started wondering, survive? What exactly? This is where Dr. Gabor Maté enters the story, not with condemnation, but with a disturbing, liberating idea. Addiction is not the problem. Addiction is an attempt to solve the problem. Suddenly the question flips. It's no longer, why am I like this? But what pain is this behavior protecting me from? Dr. Maté doesn't treat addicts like broken people. He sees them as people who adapted to unbearable emotional environments, children who learned to dissociate, to people please, to hide, because they had no other choice. In a world obsessed with fixing symptoms, Maté dares to ask, what if the wound is still open, and society just taught you how to pretend it's healed? The contradiction is sharp. Our culture applauds strength, stoicism, ambition. But it pathologizes need, vulnerability, emotion. So we learn to suppress them, to package our pain as productivity. And when those strategies fail, and they always fail eventually, we spiral into addiction, depression, rage, numbness, or just a quiet despair we never talk about. Here's the paradox. The very things we think make us resilient, detachment, independence, toughness, are often the exact masks we wear to hide our trauma. And the more convincing the mask, the more deeply hidden the wound remains. You start to wonder, what parts of yourself have you amputated to survive? Who would you be if you no longer had to perform strength? What if your addiction, your anxiety, your endless need to be good enough isn't weakness, but a brilliant, tragic survival strategy? This isn't just personal, it's systemic. Maté argues that trauma isn't the exception, it's the rule, that modern life itself is structured to separate us from our bodies, our emotions, our true selves, that the very society that defines normal is deeply, profoundly sick. So we stay busy, we stay distracted, we label symptoms, we punish coping mechanisms, we treat the addict, not the wound, we medicate the pain, but never ask where it came from. But what if true healing means stopping, really stopping, and turning toward the very things we've run from? This isn't about blaming parents or wallowing in the past. It's about finally understanding that what happened to you, or what didn't happen but should have, is shaping you more than you think. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself you had to abandon just to survive. And that starts by asking the most uncomfortable, transformative question, what am I really running from? Because as Maté reminds us again and again, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. This isn't a journey of fixing what's broken. It's about remembering what was never broken to begin with, just wounded, hidden, silenced. Now the question is, are you ready to listen to the pain underneath the noise? The deeper you look into yourself, the stranger things become. You thought you were making choices, choosing relationships, careers, values. But suddenly you start to wonder, what if most of what you call choice is actually compulsion? Not in the obvious way, not a craving for alcohol or drugs, but a craving for control, approval, performance, numbness. Gabor Maté calls this the hidden wound of modern life, the trauma of disconnection. And the most dangerous part, most people don't even know they're traumatized. Because when we hear the word trauma, we imagine war zones, abuse, catastrophe. But trauma isn't what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result. It's the wound left behind when a child isn't seen, when they're praised for obedience but never held through chaos, when a sensitive soul is told they're too much and gradually learns to shrink, to numb, to disappear. As Maté explains, trauma is not the bad things that happen to you. It's the disconnection from the self that happens as a result of what happens to you. Disconnection from the self. That's the real addiction. Let that sink in. The child who never learned it, was safe to cry, becomes the adult who overworks to avoid silence. The teenager who grew up with chaos learns to control every detail of life. The person who never felt truly accepted spends decades earning approval, never realizing they already lost themselves. Addiction, in this light, is not the disease. It's the adaptation. It's the brilliant, painful strategy your nervous system created to survive a world that didn't feel safe. And the most tragic thing? Society rewards these adaptations. The man who's emotionally numb becomes stoic. The woman who can never say no is called selfless. The workaholic is praised as driven. The disconnected are seen as strong. But strength, Maté warns, without wholeness, is just survival in disguise. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. And over time, we forget it's a mask at all. We confuse who we are with what we had to become. We are taught to suppress pain, to reject vulnerability, to silence the body. And so, we fracture, we abandon our emotions, we split from our inner child, and we call it adulthood. This isn't just individual, it's collective. We live in a society that is, by design, dissociated. A culture that glorifies productivity over presence, that medicates discomfort instead of listening to it, that pathologizes emotions instead of honoring them. In Maté's words, our culture is addicted to distraction, addicted to perfection, addicted to consumption. It's an addict trying to numb itself. And here's where the real paradox lives. You can be successful and still traumatized. You can be high-functioning and hollow. You can be applauded by the world and still not know who you are. This trauma of disconnection seeps into everything. Relationships become performance. Success becomes anesthesia. Even healing becomes another obsession, another identity to perfect. And all the while, the core wound, the disconnection from self, remains untouched. This is why Gabor Maté refuses to talk about addiction without talking about childhood, about society, about the nervous system. He doesn't ask, "What's wrong with you?" He asks, "What happened to you?" And even more powerfully, what didn't happen that should have? Did you get to cry without being shamed? Did you get to express rage without being punished? Did you feel unconditionally accepted, or only when you were good? Most people never got those things. So they coped. They silenced their bodies. They ignored their needs. They turned their suffering into habits, some into substances, others into success. But the wound stayed, and that wound becomes a worldview. You start believing you're not enough unless you're achieving. You're only lovable when you're useful. You must never show weakness. Your emotions are dangerous. Your worth is conditional. These beliefs don't come from logic. They're embedded in the body, stored in the nervous system, passed down through generations. Trauma, then, is not a personal failure. It's an inherited burden, a cultural inheritance, a societal symptom. And until we name it, until we feel it, it will run our lives like a ghost operating from the shadows. This is the hidden engine behind so much suffering, not just addiction in the conventional sense, but anxiety, depression, toxic relationships, autoimmune disease, even how we raise our children. We are hurting, and we don't even know why. So we chase solutions, supplements, medications, coaches, productivity hacks, spiritual bypasses. But the pain remains because the body remembers. The child you once were is still inside you, still waiting to be seen, still screaming in silence. And no amount of outer success can rescue that child. Only one thing can: reconnection, not with society, not with roles, not with external achievements, but with the soft, buried, terrified, brilliant truth of who you are beneath the armor. And that journey starts with one terrifying, liberating step: to stop numbing, to stop performing, to sit in silence long enough, to feel. Because as Maté teaches, healing doesn't come from fixing, it comes from remembering. Now imagine this. You walk into a room filled with laughter, people chatting, scrolling, sipping coffee, talking about work and dreams and goals. Everyone looks fine, but underneath the surface, something is off. Subtly, invisibly, almost undetectable. No one is breathing fully. No one is fully present. No one is really there. This is what trauma looks like when it's camouflaged as normal life. And this is the real epidemic. We think trauma shows up in rehab clinics, in emergency rooms, on the margins of society. But in truth, it's woven into boardrooms, bedrooms. The unseen consequence of trauma is that it rewires your sense of what's normal. You grow up in chaos. You learn to call anxiety energy. You were never allowed to cry. You call numbness calm. You were constantly criticized. You mistake people-pleasing for kindness. The body adapts. It has to. But those adaptations become prisons. That's how the trauma survives, not by destroying you, but by convincing you to wear it like a second skin. And then society reflects it back. Schools reward performance, not curiosity. Workplaces celebrate burnout as commitment. Relationships reward compliance over authenticity. No one says it, but the message is clear. Don't be too much. Don't feel too deeply. Don't slow down. Don't fall apart. The world demands you stay in character, even if the character is killing you. And here's the haunting part. You don't even realize it's happening, because everyone else is doing it too. This is what Gabor Maté calls the social illusion. A collective forgetting, a mass numbing, a cultural trauma so vast we mistake it for reality. So we self-regulate the only way we know how: scrolling, shopping, hustling, drinking, fixing others, fixing ourselves, always moving, never stopping, never feeling. Because if you stop, the silence will scream. This is why trauma is so hard to heal, not because it's buried deep, but because it's disguised as who you think you are. You think you're just anxious, just high-achieving, just introverted, just bad at relationships. But what if those are all defense mechanisms your nervous system built to protect you? Now layer in the cultural messages. A child cries in public. What do we say? Stop that, you're fine. A teen rebels. What do we label them? Troublemaker. A woman sets a boundary. She's selfish. A man shows emotion. He's weak. From the earliest moments, we are taught to betray ourselves to belong. And so we split. The true self, raw, emotional, intuitive, and the adapted self, calm, polite, successful, and silently suffering. The longer we live from this adapted self, the more disconnected we become from our instincts, our bodies, our truth. And here's where the real consequences erupt, not just emotionally, but physically. Gabor Maté spent decades working with people suffering from chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, and cancer. And he found a haunting pattern. The people most likely to get sick were the ones who never said no. They were the ones who suppressed anger, avoided conflict, put others first at all costs. They weren't weak, they were strong. But that strength came from self-erasure, and the body keeps the score. The immune system mirrors your emotional boundaries. If you can't say no psychologically, your body may stop saying no biologically. Your cells learn the same pattern you learned. Let everything in. Don't protect yourself. The cost: chronic inflammation, fatigue, depression, disease. All from a wound you couldn't see. And in relationships, the cost is even more invisible. You lose yourself in others. You attract partners who mirror your original wound, because the nervous system craves the familiar, even if it's painful. You mistake anxiety for chemistry. You mistake caretaking for love. You don't know how to receive. You only know how to give until you're empty. And still, you feel unworthy. Because deep down, you're not relating from wholeness. You're relating from survival. This is how trauma quietly infects every corner of life. Not with loud drama, but with subtle corrosion. You don't lose everything at once. You lose small pieces of yourself every day. A yes you didn't mean, a truth you swallowed, a boundary you ignored. Until one day, you look in the mirror and you don't know who you are anymore. You've become a collection of reactions, a mosaic of masks, a performance of safety. And still, you're praised for it. This is why Gabor Maté calls for a complete redefinition of trauma and healing. He's not interested in pathologizing symptoms. He's interested in excavating truth. Because healing isn't just about sobriety or symptom reduction. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. It's about feeling safe enough to feel, to say, I'm not okay, to stop performing, to rest, to rage, to need. It's about recognizing that your compulsions were not flaws, but messages, not sins, but strategies, not weaknesses, but wisdom. And those messages are still speaking through your body, your triggers, your exhaustion, your longing. The question is, are you listening yet? What if healing doesn't look like success? What if it looks like falling apart, on purpose? Imagine sitting in a room alone. No music, no phone, no distractions, just you, and the parts of yourself you've been running from. The grief, the rage, the need, the aching loneliness you buried beneath 100 roles. That's where the rebellion begins, not with a plan, not with productivity, but with stillness, with silence, with the terrifying decision to stop running. Because healing isn't a straight line, it's a return to the self you exiled, a return to the child who never got to cry, a return to the body you silenced for decades. Gabor Maté teaches that this rebellion is not about fixing yourself, because you were never broken. You adapted, you survived, you did what you had to do. But now, you are safe enough to remember. And here's the paradox. The path to healing often begins with grief. Grief for the childhood you didn't get. Grief for the love you had to earn. Grief for the years spent living someone else's life. That grief is sacred. It is the price of reconnection. It is not weakness. It is awakening. And once you begin, you'll realize this isn't about addiction. It's about truth. Addiction, whether to substances, success, validation, or control, isn't a disease to be cured. It's a signal, a symptom, a message your body sends when the soul has been silenced. So what does rebellion look like? 1. Listening to your body. Not to control it, but to hear it. The tightness in your chest, that's your boundary speaking. The ache in your stomach, that's your truth unspoken. The fatigue, that's your soul begging for rest, not a new supplement. 2. Letting go of roles. Stop being the strong one. Stop being the fixer. Stop being the silent achiever, the perfect partner, the invisible caretaker. Those were masks. They helped you survive, but they are not you. 3. Reparenting yourself. You didn't get the nurture, the validation, the presence you needed. Become the parent you needed. Speak to yourself with softness. Hold yourself when the world feels too much. Say what no one said to you. I see you. You're allowed to feel. You don't have to earn love. 4. Feeling your feelings fully. No numbing, no bypassing, no intellectualizing. Let the tears come. Let the rage rise. Let the fear be heard. Because the feelings you repress become the compulsions that control you. 5. Redefining safety. You learn to feel safe by controlling everything, but real safety is internal. It's the nervous system uncoiling. It's the body trusting you won't abandon it again. It's knowing you can feel and survive. 6. Saying no. Not to be difficult, but to be whole. Every no to the world is a yes to your soul. That's not selfish. That's sovereignty. 7. Finding others who are doing the same. Healing in isolation is possible, but healing in community is profound. Because trauma happened in relationship, and so does repair. These aren't steps on a checklist. They're acts of rebellion against a culture that taught you to betray yourself to belong. They are acts of love toward the parts of you that were never welcomed. And slowly, something shifts. You start to recognize your compulsions as old stories, not truths. You no longer fear your feelings. You honor them. You begin to rest, not as a reward, but as a right. You learn that being enough isn't something to achieve. It's something to remember. You begin to see addiction for what it always was, a brilliant, desperate attempt to feel okay in a world that never made space for your pain. But now, you're making space for truth, for wholeness, for you. And maybe for the first time, you don't want to be high-functioning. You want to be free. That is the rebellion. That is healing, not an escape, but a return to the body, to the truth, to the unfiltered humanity that trauma once demanded you hide. And this journey isn't linear. You will fall back into old patterns. You will forget. You will numb. You will question it all. But each time you'll return faster. Each time you'll speak to yourself with more compassion. Each time you'll abandon yourself a little less. Because healing doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. And presence, as Gabor Maté says, is the antidote to trauma. When you are fully here, with your grief, your rage, your tenderness, your joy, you are no longer surviving. You are living. Imagine this. You're walking through a forest after a storm. The trees are bent. Some have fallen. The ground is soaked, scarred. But there is light now, gentle, golden, filtering through the mist. You stop. You breathe. And in that moment, you realize something profound. You are the forest. Not the damage, not the storm. You are what remains, what lives, what regrows. And that's the truth trauma tries to hide. You were never the pain. You were the one who carried it. The deepest realization in Gabor Maté's work is not just about trauma or addiction or healing. It is this: your pain was never a sign of brokenness. It was a sign of how deeply you felt. That you were sensitive in a world that demanded numbness. That you craved truth in a society built on performance. That you needed connection, but were taught to suppress need. You suffered, not because something was wrong with you, but because you were still alive in a world that forgot how to feel. This is the core of Maté's message. This is the final undoing of the illusion. The illusion that trauma means weakness, that addiction means failure, that healing means returning to normal. What if you were never supposed to return? What if the goal isn't to go back to who you were, but to become who you were always meant to be, before the world taught you to hide? This is where healing becomes spiritual, not religious, not dogmatic, but deeply, radically human. You begin to see that your addiction was a sacred cry, an SOS for connection, that your compulsions were your soul's language, that your triggers are teachers, that your discomfort is a compass. You stop asking, "How do I get rid of this?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" Every symptom becomes a signpost, every shadow a doorway, every ache an invitation, and behind it all, you find something that was always there, waiting, your essence, unscarred, unbroken, unconditionally worthy. And here's the paradox. The final realization doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't explode. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like breath returning, like silence after years of noise. You don't need to chase it. You need only to stop running from yourself. You begin to live not in reaction, but in response, not in survival, but in soul. You realize healing is not a destination, it's a relationship with yourself, with your body, with your story, with the world, and in that relationship there is room for everything, the pain and the pleasure, the rage and the tenderness, the child and the elder, the addict and the healer. All of them belong, and so do you. You begin to speak from truth, not from defense, to rest without guilt, to love without losing yourself, to say no without fear, to say yes from wholeness. This is the revolution Gabor Maté points toward, not just an individual healing, but a cultural remembering, a society that values connection over competition, presence over performance, compassion over compliance. It starts with you. When you heal, you don't just break your own cycle. You break ancestral cycles. You shift the energy in your relationships. You change how your children see themselves. You show the world that healing is possible. And more than that, it's your birthright. And so now, the question is no longer, can I be fixed? The question is, can I love myself enough to stop performing wholeness and start living it? You were never the mask. You were never the addiction. You were never the story someone else wrote for you. You are the author now. Write with rage if you must. Write with tears. Write with silence. But write from your truth. Because your truth is not too much. It is the medicine. And as you step back into the forest of your own soul, bruised but breathing, aching but alive, you'll realize something even more powerful than healing. You were never lost. You were just waiting to be seen.